J425 Live. Welcome to Single Issue Voter. That's what we're covering today. So John Yates is a fisherman, or he was a fisherman, and fished commercially his whole life off the Florida coast. That's all he wanted to be. So he was a novice, whatever they call crewman at the beginning, and then worked his way up to, he had a crew of 5 or 6 in his own boat, and he was happy doing that. Until 2015, he was coming in, fishing snapper, all day off the Florida coast, when all of a sudden he's pulled over, which is probably a little bit odd, in 10 feet of water off the Florida coast. If you've ever been out there, it's very shallow and very flat. You can see almost all the way to Cuba. And so I wonder what it was like to get pulled over by somebody who purports to be a federal agent and has the identification to match, boards the fishing boat, and demands to see the fish. And the agent's got a ruler or measuring tape with him. Says he wants to measure the fish. John says, okay, but, we've been out for 4 days. I've got a whole, the whole galley is filled. They're on ice. I got a ton of them. We're headed in. And the agent guy's like, that's fine. I have all day. And so the crew sits there while the agent proceeds to measure each and every snapper. Maybe 1,000 or more, taking up 5-6 hours the rest of the daylight and wasting everybody's time. But John is patient. He doesn't say anything about the fact that the agent obviously doesn't know how to correctly measure a snapper. You have to take into account the shape of their nose and measure from that to the tip to determine their true length. And anything that's under 20 inches is supposed to be returned at that point. That's the law. And so when the agent gets done flopping the fish around in front of everybody, he calls the captain over and he says, listen, I measured all your fish and I found 72 that are under 20 inches. And he goes over them with John at that point. And it's true, some of these fish may be 19.5 inches. He may have just measured a lot of them wrong when they're over 20 inches. Some of them might be 19.5 though. Some of them might be 19. There's none that are real small, and they're all within, the neighborhood. Nobody's trying to get over on anyone here. But the facts of the matter are, laws are laws, and, some of these may be under 20 inches. So the agent counts up 72 fish, writes a ticket, and says, we're not going to deal with this here. I want you to hold on to these when you get back into port, 3 or 4 days. I'll meet you there, and we'll handle it. So that's what happens. Brings the crew in, and the agent is there, and brings the box of the questionable snapper out, and he counts and measures them again. This time there's only 69. There's not 72. There's 69. And some of them are now, according to the agent, they used to be 19.5 inches, and now a lot of them are 20 inches. So something's changed. Well, he accuses John of getting rid of the real 72 fish and then replacing them with 69 different fish, many of which are still undersized, but just differently undersized. And he tells the captain that that's destruction of evidence, and that could be a felony. That could be seen as a felony. And just, almost having a hard time believing this is reality, I'm sure, at this point. The captain is just like, denies that stuff and just says, dude, this is just whatever. I'm sure they shrank. It's been a while. He probably measured wrong. I don't know if he said that or not, but basically he threw up his arm and said, whatever, man. He said, what are you going to do? And the guy says, okay, you'll be hearing from us. And it strikes him as a weird deal, but time goes by, right? In fact, years go by, and he just forgets about it. until almost 2019, when they always come at dawn, don't they? At 4:30 in the morning, bunch of federal agents kicked in his door and braced him up in front of his wife and charged him with 72 counts, felony counts of destruction of evidence under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is a federal act that was created after the Enron accounting scandal, where a bunch of accountants shredded a bunch of documents to like cover up billions of dollars in fraud. They use that on fish, okay, on fish. Further, it turns out that the legal size was 18 inches. None of the fish, none of the 69, none of the 72, none of them were under 18 inches. So all the fish were legal. The captain didn't get cited for having any fish that were too small. He got cited for destroying evidence. 72 felony counts. Now, you think that this is going to, I can just imagine what it must have been like. You think that this is something that's going to be sorted out because this just doesn't make sense, right? You lived your whole life following the rule of law. Even you're following the rule of law here. You're trying to keep your patience and, play along. You're not like lawyering up, it just, the ridiculousness of it all must have got to him. But next thing you know, he's in court. He's in federal court. And then there's a, United States attorney pushing forward on these charges. And it gets towards the end of the case, and it's pretty clear that, like, by the letter of the law, like, he's facing some serious time. And so his lawyer talks to him, his lawyer not being, having the money or resources that the United States government has. And I've been in this position too. Sometimes you just got to say, well, shit, I guess I got to take a deal because I don't want to go to prison for however many years. They gave him 30 days. So John gets 30 days in prison, federal prison, for not breaking any laws about the fish that he was fishing for. And on the ridiculous theory that he replaced 72 fish with 69 similar fish, all of which were his and all of which were illegal. He had no way of disproving it. Because how can you disprove any of that, right? You can't. His only option was to drain his resources until he could take a plea. He took a plea and he did his 30 days in jail, and he was so upset by this whole thing that he had to go to 3 weeks of inpatient mental counseling after the fact. He was so upset about it because it's just not how you align. It's not how you think your country is going to align with you. And he gets done with that, and he just wants to retire. But his wife is one of those women who knows, what's right and what's wrong. And she's correct about this. Like she says, we need to stand up so that this doesn't happen to the next guy. She's correct in theory. In principle, you might find that you can just get ground up. And I know this is foreign to a lot of people, and you think that this kind of stuff would never happen because it doesn't even make sense, right? Well, it happened to him, and they fought it. They appealed it. They appealed it all the way up through district. They appealed it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And he got the ruling this year, and they won. They won on appeal at the Supreme Court by one vote. It was 5-4 ruling. And I went and read the decisions, and every single one is a pedantic, discussion of application of a tax law versus the, utility of a fish as a record. None of it is just like, this is fucking bullshit. What is wrong with you people? There's none of that. And so he wins, but spent his retirement, and now he's working again. He's a janitor. His wife's working again. Imagine how cynical they are. I say that to say this, like, you think that you're operating in one situation. You think that you're in the United States of America and it is everything that you thought it was. Something like that happens to you or somebody you know, and you have to rapidly accept reality, that it's not what you thought. And a lot of it is random, and a lot of it is just petty fucking tyrants, just beyond frustrating, beyond your ability to comprehend, really, and just not good people. What are the motivations? We may never know. I've been through something similar to that, and I'll tell that story a different time. I tell that story now. I say that to say this, that we have to revisit the transgender policy issue again, because that thing is just spreading like wildfire. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's coming up every day now with a new state adopting the um, social transitioning of kids at school, leaving the parents out, doing it in secret, that kind of stuff. It hit mainstream network news last night because Kamala Harris's VP pick just signed into law like the most progressive trans kid sanctuary state law for Minnesota in the country, and it's about the same as what we have here. It's about the same as what Lake Stevens Schools has had since 2021. Theirs might be a little bit more liberal, but like I told you in 2021, and we've talked about before, there is policy in place at Lake Stevens School where they have somebody on staff who is an expert and who can talk to kids at the school and help them process their social transition from one gender to the next, which would include picking a name and their identity and how they want to be referred to in class, and what's going to make them feel comfortable and that sort of stuff, which bathroom they want to use, and anything else really. And that if you're a parent, you may not be informed of this. If you are informed of it, if the way you react is viewed as negative or threatening or unaccepting, you can be taken out of the loop again. And in some cases, it can become a further problem for you. Like if you're getting divorced down the road, there's stuff in the school policy guidebooks that get handed out about how staff can make sure that the kid is going to be leveraged towards the person who's most accepting of their identity, that sort of stuff. There's examples of federal cases working through right now where parents' unwillingness to play ball with this gender identity stuff has gotten CPS involved. So you put policy that's as explosive as this into the larger framework of the social experiment, the government that we live in, largely. Now, I'm not saying that the school district is the same as the federal government and state government. It's not, and that's why it should be a good thing. It should be something that we're able to control to a certain degree. But the fact that a policy is in place right now that can allow something that explosive to happen behind the back of a parent, facilitated by another adult that you aren't going to know who it is, nor what their qualifications are. And obviously you may not want them speaking to your child about their sexuality or gender or, etc. That may be out of your control. And all of that is made far more urgent by the fact that as the months go by, more and more actual information is coming out about how fucking dangerous it is to transition a healthy kid socially or not. This isn't a comment on transgender kids. This is a conversation about the options that adults and experts, read activists, are giving these kids. The funnel that they're putting them in that spins them down to a series of hellish results, none of which are FDA approved, medically verified, none of which are proven to do anything good for any of them, and in many cases are definitely proven to leave children who are otherwise healthy, maimed, lacking appendages, in extreme distress, facing multiple new complications. And those complications range all the way to and through situations of abuse, kidnapping, sexual trafficking that come as a result of their new identity and from the gaps that appear between their family life when secrets and other adults come into the picture. And past that even, and all the way to and through death can occur as a result of these secret conversations that occur. And there are the first spate of cases working their way through federal courts now, where there is a full narrative of what happens when on day one, you know, little Jenny comes into school and the counselor thinks she should be a boy, and they have that conversation, and the next day she's in the boys' bathroom and things go wrong. There's an assault. Maybe there's 2 assaults, and now they want the kid to help them cover it up, and now they're calling the kid a liar, and the kid's saying, I'm not a liar, and they leverage the transition, and then they don't tell the parents, and the kid gets bullied more. In this specific case I told you about it the other day, the kid runs away. The identity goes so bad that the parents don't even know about. The kid runs away to try to protect the parents from all the shit that's fallen behind it. And then multiple abductions, multiple sexual traffickings, rapes, horrible, horrible shit. And the kid is gone for years and returned never the same. And that's something that's happened since this spate of policy has gone in. And we're going to talk about this. I'm not going to take all night on this, but it's just super important because we can't afford to have that happen to one family in this district or really anywhere else. And it scares the hell out of me because most people still don't know about this stuff. And every time I sit down and explain this, usually to a man, every time I explain it to a guy around here, I get the same answer. Every time you see people talk about it to somebody who at first isn't going to believe it and then say, well, I think you know what's going to be said. I'll just play this example.
Sexual parade. I've always thought that would be the trigger for violence. If someone did that shit to my kids, I'd shoot them without thinking about it.
I think it's going to come to that. I think it's pretty.
Well, that's so ridiculous. Like if someone, that's a form of sexual abuse. Sexual parade. I've always thought that would be the trigger for violence. If someone did that shit to my kids, I'd shoot them without thinking about it.
I think it's going to come to that. I think it's pretty.
Well, that's so ridiculous. Like if someone, that's a form of sexual abuse.
I know you might think that sounds glib or rash, and it is unreasonable. But if you are thinking about, and I'm so deep in imagining this because I've read all these accounts, if your kid goes to school in the morning and you don't see him for 3 months and they return to you in a different gender with a different name, they've been raped 4 times, trafficked 3 times, and this is the result of a counselor deciding to secretly change their identity based on a theory that has not been proven out anywhere, and that all the Western countries in Europe have turned their back on and stopped doing this. But for whatever reason, we're still moving forward with it at public school. If all that happens and you come face to face as a man with the man or woman who arbitrarily did this to your kid, I'm not saying anybody should do that, but you can certainly understand that there are going to be some high emotion exchanges that occur if this doesn't get fixed. And it should just get fixed, because we don't send kids to school to get the counselor's opinion on their gender identity or sexuality, or to get other adults involved in secret conversations with our kids about their gender identity, sexuality, or how their bodies conform to their images of sex and gender. Now, I think in the long run, this stuff is going to get worked out, but it's going to take a while. It's not going to get worked out this year. So that's why a couple more times we're going to revisit this so that you can be educated about what the stakes are, what's really going on out there, what the rules are, and so that you can have a little bit of rhetorical tools to use against the activists who are so damn good at twisting language, right? To make you think that they've got like all this, years of records and proven results and all this stuff, when in point of fact, there's nothing there. There's nothing behind it. It's all just a bunch of gobbledygook and pain. So we're going to return to this a couple times so that you know what's going on. You know that it's real, and you know that there is a risk of this occurring, and that it is occurring elsewhere. And we're going to talk about it because, in my mind, whether it is here, and you're talking about it locally and talking to the school board about what they need to do to continue to have the community support, or whether you are following a presidential election, which I don't vote in. But for me, I'd be a one-issue voter right now. I'd be a one-issue voter because, you talk about what's important to you. There is no other area of medicine where they are chopping off the healthy body parts of children based on the elective decision of either an adult or that kid. That's not happening anywhere else. The closest thing, I guess, would be plastic surgery on like adult females and men, I'm talking like fake boobs or something like that. That doesn't even begin to describe the violence of radical mastectomy on a 14-year-old girl or the castration of a 13-year-old boy. And you're thinking, okay, that never happens. Yeah, it does. It does happen. And they're adding to it. They're adding to it because WPATH, the professional organization that sets the standards of care for this whole oeuvre of horrors, has added another classification to the mix this year. Eunuch. Yeah, eunuch is a new gender identity. In the old days, that just meant a guy who was castrated. That's still what it means, but it applies to children. And how do you tell if a child is a eunuch? Well, it presents by the fact that they want to have their dick cut off so that they could be a eunuch. That's in WPATH's Standards of Care 8. And they are seen as the, they are the ultimate organization for knowledge on gender transitioning. And so if that doesn't piss you off and make your mind begin to rattle, then let me tell you, we're just beginning to get a little bit below the surface. And I can't go too deep or I'll lose all of you and everyone will just want to just go, do something else and forget about it. And we can't do that because it is right here. The point that I want to make is to show you that every single layer of this crap that got to the point where this was introduced as policy, every single layer of it is bullshit. Let me get rid of Tucker here. And you remember I did the story about the origin of gender transition of children, the origin story, the very first, the guy who came up with it. Where did this come from? John Money came up with it in 1972. He had a theory. That gender was a social construct. He wanted to test it. He met some twins, babies, or the parents brought them in. One was injured in a circumcision accident, and his penis was it was horribly injured. Well, Dr. Money saw this as a perfect opportunity to take these two boys and secretly raise one as a girl, cut the rest of it off, and just tell him he's a girl. And then obviously his theory being that gender is a social construct, that'll just be a girl. I mean, really, that's all there is, right? There's no difference between men and women. So that would be his theory. And that's what happens. He forces these two twin boys to live a lie for the rest of their natural lives. And the horrors that occur during their annual visits with Money, where eventually you're going to be shocked to hear this, but it turns out he's a pedophile and that he likes to rape little kids. I know, shock, right? Well, they get that on top of everything else. And while their lives and psyches are being destroyed and bodies, and while they both ultimately kill themselves, both of the boys, Money writes this up in his professional papers as a screaming success. He solved it. He solved that gender is a social construct, and he's transitioned a kid. He doesn't mention the sexual abuse or the suicides that he killed. They killed themselves because it was so horrible. Instead, he lies in this paper. It becomes the standard off which an entire industry is built. Thousands and thousands of gender transitions, all built off his lie, a lie that he kept hidden for years. Now, his colleagues at Johns Hopkins found out about it, and they were so disgusted that they literally got a bulldozer and they bulldozed the gender clinic there, and they didn't open a new one for 25 years. That said, it was too late. They let his lie stand, and his lie still stands today to the point where you won't even believe. Like, we'll type in his Wikipedia. And everything I told you, there's no dispute to it. That's just what happened. Everybody acknowledges it. There's multiple books about it and documentaries and stuff. So just because you're not going to see a lot of that doesn't mean that it's not accepted as truth. But check this out. So it doesn't start out by saying he was the, pedophile and criminal who conducted horrible eugenic experiments on twins to defraud an entire medical industry. No, he advanced the use of more accurate terminology in sex research, coining the terms gender role and sexual orientation. It does say his work has been subject to scrutiny, which is kind of like lying about everything, torturing two kids, making the kids have sex with each other and then having sex with them, that sort of stuff. Like, I guess you could say that there was some scrutiny about that. Not enough to really get into it, though. Just talks about his other work. They finish it up by saying Money's writing has been translated into many languages and includes around 2,000 articles, books, chapters, and reviews. He's received around 65 honors, awards, and degrees in his lifetime. If this doesn't show you the difference between what people like you and me might think of a serial pedophile and a Frankenstein who cuts the genitalia off little kids and makes them live a lie and then celebrates it and gets rich off of it, the way me and you might think about that sort of guy, look how they think about him. It's really not that big of a deal to him. What's one kid? What's two kids? What's 1,000 kids? I don't see any other way than how to, that's how I think that they're portraying it. It's really, when I first went through this and just in telling the Money story, I couldn't sleep for a week. It was so dark, and I already knew about it some, but so like I was saying, every portion of the origin story, or the, for lack of a better word, the science of transgender theory involving kids, I guess every aspect of transitioning children is bullshit. Every part of it is dark. Every part of it is a lie. And every part of it, you just are left going why? Why? For what reason? And so I want to just give you a little bit of that map in your head so that you know each step of it is wrong. And then I think that I'll just kind of peel back for now. But so where did this idea come from in general? The gender transitioning of anyone? A German sexologist named Magnus Hirschfeld, he did the first one in 1922, okay? And he did some work until World War II. John Money came along in the 1970s. He was working at Johns Hopkins, and he was obsessed with transvestites there. So he had all these theories and proclivities and stuff, and that's where he came in and did the first gender transitioning of children, which is the twins, the Reimer twins. The short version of that is he tested his social construct on twin boys. He molested both of them for a decade. The transition failed. Both boys killed themselves. Gender, it turned out, was not a societal construct. The experiment was a catastrophic failure, but he wrote it up as a success, and he was celebrated for it. Thousands of transitions followed. He got rich, and whole science was built off of it, a science that still comes from the roots of his work today. There's no way to separate the two. That's why his Wikipedia page was so not, polished up. So Money starts this thing off. He tells everybody the great success. People start doing it left and right. Doctors start doing gender transitions on babies and kids. And meanwhile, over in Europe, they're doing a different sort of thing. They're a little bit better about it. They've got a different theory. They're more careful. And over there, they're coming up with a different standard of doing this. They're doing some interventions on kids that are more like in their teens who are having some, some trouble fitting in, some differences in gender or sex that are have always been part of humanity, and they're coming up with ways to deal with that. So it's a little more practical. They're developing something called the Dutch protocol over there, which is sort of like, we're just going to wait this out and see, because we know that a very large percentage of kids who go through something like this are going to grow out of it, and the rest of them are probably going to be homosexual, and then a tiny bit of them might be trans. So that was the theory over there. That's kind of been like the standard outcome anyways. And so they were developing this thing called the Dutch protocol, built around that standard deviation, right? Like where most of these kids are going to grow out of it. Some are going to be gay, and very few are going to be trans. So let's come up with a way of giving them care that allows for all those outcomes to naturally arrive before we start chopping things off and giving them crazy drugs and stuff. Sounds like a good idea, but at the same time, they introduced something called puberty blockers, which they presented to the world as something that would be harmless and would pause development and let you make a decision. Well, it's since turned out that that was complete bullshit. And really, we never should have bought that to begin with. You think you can just pause puberty and come back like 7 years later and nothing's going to happen? That aside, the medication that they used as a puberty blocker was always used off-label. And I don't know how people missed this for so long, but the medication they're using as a puberty blocker was and is an extremely powerful drug that's on-label use is the chemical castration of adult male rapists. That's a fact. And so when this researcher named Biggs started writing about this in 2023, he started ripping apart the Dutch protocol standard, the safer standard, because if you take the puberty blockers block out, which they are saying is a way to pause development and give a kid a way to think about things, if the reality of that situation is you're actually sterilizing a kid as soon as they get on this medication, and you're also stunting their growth, the ones who don't get sterilized, Further, research also develops the fact that puberty blockers is actually like the first gateway into like almost 100% gender transition. It's not a pause button. It's you just stepped under the elevator and you're going up. Like 98% of the people who get put on that stay on this path. There's no doubling back, partially because it's not actually a pause, I think. But if you think of it as a funnel, once you get to that point of the funnel, you're going down. And I'm sure you've heard, the emotional blackmail of, do you want a dead kid or do you want a trans kid? That old disgusting thing that they've used against parents for years and years and years. There is some truth to it. Suicidality goes up exponentially for the cohort of kids that get put into the transitioning bucket. But they're not putting themselves there. They're getting selected into there with a push from the adult world, as we just described, right? Some adult is telling them about this supposedly harmless pause. When in actuality, you're not pausing when you get on that medication. You are now in the cohort. You are on something that's going to sterilize you, fuck with your head, fuck with your development. You just, by taking that one medication, your outcomes for a healthy, happy life went down a ton, right? You don't know that, but like that's the fact of it. So this whole standard that the Dutch protocol came up with, this idea of gender affirming care, where we just repeat back whatever they say and we let them decide, it's bullshit. It sets you on a highway to harm that doesn't have any good outcomes, or they're few and far between. So the final part that took apart the gender affirming care, which was kind of like the envelope term for waiting, monitoring, puberty blockers, being positive, letting them explore, that sort of thing. The experiment that proved it out was said to be this very wide longitudinal study, right? Upon further examination after time went by, it was less than 20 individuals total. 8 of them stopped reporting, so it was really more like 12 or something like that. One of them died. Not like got run over by a car on the way there, or he died from the treatment. He died because the puberty blockers affected, and this is another side effect of them, they affect your growth of your genitalia if you're a boy. So they put you on this stuff, your penis doesn't grow the way it's supposed to. And if they've got you on the track to be a transsexual, they're thinking about chopping that penis off anyways. But I'm sorry if this is so much information. You need to hear this, because this is what they're thinking about doing to kids. This is they're plotting out. We get them on the puberty blockers. It stunts the growth of the penis, but it gives us enough left over to craft a nice vagina. That's what they're thinking. That's really what they're doing. Well, they gave them a little too much of one thing or another, and there wasn't enough left to craft whatever they wanted to craft. And so when they did the surgery to give this poor kid his transition from male to female, they had to pull some of his intestines out of his body to form his new female genitalia. And they did a real shoddy job of that. And he got infected, and it turned to sepsis, and it got so infected and into his intestines, and he died from it. He died from the fake gender that they gave him after they put him on sterilization drugs that they call puberty blockers. And then they took his death out of the count so that we didn't see 4% fatality rate in the Dutch protocol. It just said, wide longitudinal study with great success. In any other area, if a healthy teenage boy dies and your fatality percent is like between 1% and 5%, depending on how you look at it, the whole thing should have been stopped way back then. They just hit it. They non-personed him. They killed him and they non-personed him. And they killed him in the most vile, painful, embarrassing, and hurtful way possible. And then they just took him off like he never existed. And they went forward with another bullshit justification for why some dude at some school needs to be secretly speaking to your kid about these kind of changes, okay? So right there, we've talked about the origin of gender transitioning. It was done by a crazy pedophile who killed the first 2 patients. We just talked about the more safer European Dutch protocol standard, where they put you on puberty blockers and you get a nice safe amount of time to have a timeout. Except the puberty blockers are actually what we give to full-grown adult male rapists to sterilize them, and they do horrible things to kids. And once you're on them, you're on your way to getting transitioned anyways. And furthermore, the whole study was a lie, because the idea of gender-affirming care and safety and time and letting nature take its course was bullshit and invalidated by the fact that a kid died and they hid it. Okay, a kid died and they hid it. So there you go, those 2 ways of thinking. So every time you see gender-affirming care on a school document or somebody telling you that it's just vital, it's mandatory that you participate in gender-affirming care, I want you to know what that is, okay? That's a kid dying from an infected wound where they pulled his intestines out of his body to make a makeshift vagina because they cut up his penis too much. And he died. Okay? They don't have a plan. None of this is scientific. This is a bunch of disgusting, godless, sick monsters with scalpels doing whatever the hell they want to somebody else's kid. And if they die, they delete them. And they move forward like they didn't die. Which just shows you what's the point of any of the tests anyways. They're just going to lie about it. They've lied in the 2 biggest cases that I've told you about, which are the origin story of the modern gender transition thing that we're in right now, right? Unbelievable. It's all true though, and I'll put my notes up for you too. Okay, so from there, let me just touch on 2 other things, right? So the UK was going, balls to the wall on, well, it's not a good term, but UK was processing a lot of transitioning youth at the same time. In fact, they opened the largest youth gender clinic in the world, and it was called Tavistock, and it was run by the UK's socialized medicine program, and it was seen as the best standard of care in the world for this sort of thing. Doing by far the most volume of surgeries and treatments, doing the puberty blockers, and doing surgeries mainly after the age of majority and stuff, and thousands and thousands and thousands of procedures done there. Like I said, the leading place in the world. That place got closed last year. After the British government ordered a 4-year study from the best clinicians they have. They gave them an unlimited budget, and the best clinicians took 4 years and ordered every kind of test that they wanted, and they examined everything. And the woman whose name is Dr. Cass, her 4-year study ended last year, and she wrote a scathing 400-page document that immediately halted all gender transitioning of kids in the UK, immediately ended the use of puberty blockers on kids in the UK, and criticized the United States for failing to heed the developments in medicine and look out for our kids, and instead listening to a bunch of nutcases with political agendas that we can't possibly understand, who are coming up with justifications to get their scalpels and hands on other people's kids. Okay. Her 4-year study from an unaffiliated but respected pediatrician. Unaffiliated is important because every time you're going to see one of these new gender identity bills at the state level, I guarantee you it's usually a transgender person who's authored it, and they've become the expert themselves and cited themselves in what needs to happen. That's what happened in Minnesota, you know. So this doctor writes a 4-year study. It's published in all the best journals and stuff. And her first takeaway is that the entire youth gender medicine world is built on shaky foundations. She tells the New York Times that the U.S. doctors and doctor groups who are supporting and forwarding hormonal and surgical procedures are out of date. She concluded that evidence supporting the use of puberty-blocking drugs and hormonal medications in adolescents was remarkably weak and unjustified at all in the UK. So on her recommendation, then the NHS, the health service over there, immediately stopped prescribing puberty blockers. So anybody tells you that stuff, just think everywhere else in the Western world, they blew the whistle quick. Like, we looked at this. We see what's happening. Dr. Kess's findings are in line with the other major Western European countries who used to be at the forefront of this stuff until they saw the horrors of what was happening to these kids and families. They all pulled back. I'm talking about, Norway, the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, the Netherlands, Finland, a bunch of them. They've all pulled back. The only ones left out in the forefront is America. And we're not doing it based on some sort of set of great results or outcomes. We're doing it on the old standard from Europe, and a bunch of people going, I don't want to hear it. A bunch of people saying, this matter has already been settled. Chop the kids' genitals off. That's basically what's happening. And they're going to shout you down. They won't have a conversation with you. They're going to try and shout you down. They're going to cite a bunch of 3-letter organizations in America that may or may not have written like a letter in support of this in 2019 or something like that. They're not going to be able to say that any of this is safe, effective, proven, good for kids, because it's just not, okay? And you got the people who've done the findings elsewhere on our ass about it. Like, what are you people doing over there? And that's what I'm trying to say to you too, okay? 24 states in America banned this stuff outright. The rest are going the other direction because this has become politicized, where blue people want to go balls to the wall with cutting off the balls, and red states want to stop this. It shouldn't be that, because this isn't about whether you believe in transgender people in general or whether you support that. That's not what this is about. This is about the fact that there is no medicine behind this. There's only pain. So it doesn't matter if they were transgender or if they were some other thing. The point of the fact is that the adults who are trying to get their hands on them, for whatever reasons, are putting them through unimaginable pain and horror, regardless of whether we agree with the social construct. The social construct is beside the point. There isn't anybody who should be supporting this stuff, because, at what point would you just turn your head and go, sure, that sounds good, if they're going to put your kid on sterilization drugs and remove healthy body parts? Like, what? All right, so I think this will be the last part that I talk about right here, and we'll double back on it. WPATH. WPATH is it's an acronym. I don't forget what it stands for right now, but it is the father organization for this kind of medicine in the United States and in the world. Like, they are the leading physicians who do this kind of work, the leading researchers. It houses all the standards. They put out the new and improved standards of care, which the whole transgender industry eagerly awaits to see. Each new edition of the standards of care talks about the new classifications, the state-of-the-art surgeries, the procedures, who's doing what, that kind of stuff. And so WPATH houses the best thinking, and they're the go-to place where you say, well, they've done the study, they've ruled, this is what the best practices are. Well, for a couple reasons, it turns out that old WPATH, beyond highly questionable, just an incredible shit show of monsters like every other angle of this whole thing. So the 2 points that we'll talk about with WPATH, and not today, I'm just going to give you the overview. They released their latest standards of care in the last year. It's called SOC 8 or Standards of Care 8, which is just the updated spate of treatments and best practices for this community. And I told you that one of the controversial things they included was they decided to come up with a new identity, eunuch. Great. Yeah. What's a eunuch? It's a valid gender identity in children that is characterized by a sincere desire to be castrated. To make a eunuch, you just castrate him. Okay, great. Good to know. They also have the instructions on some new non-traditional genital surgeries, such as the, quote, penile preserving vaginoplasty, which is what I was referring to earlier about how you're going to want to save some of this for that, right? So they're just talking about getting to work on that a little bit earlier. You know, not really leaving a lot of room for anybody to get out of these death traps, right? So they include these two great new ideas: the eunuch, which is a kid who needs to be castrated, in the penile preserving vaginoplasty, right, which is the creation of pseudo genitalia. That's one for males who want to be non-binary. I guess they get both. And by males they mean a kid. So these things are causing controversy anyways. Here's the big controversy with the standards of care. A big thing that they'd done that had made people feel good and safer was that they brought forward age minimum for surgeries, a recommended age minimum for hormones, which we shouldn't be doing hormones at all, it turns out, and surgeries. So like in Europe, they're not doing any surgeries, elective surgeries on kids. It's all like 18 now, with very few exceptions. Well, we didn't have that at WPATH, and in America, they weren't following stuff like that. They are doing radical mastectomies on 13-year-olds or younger. So the idea that WPATH was going to put their heads together and finally come up with age guidelines was met with, okay, people were saying, all right, that sounds like we're putting some realistic guidelines out there finally. And the draft that came out, it did have age minimums in it. People were like, great. Well, a few hours later, they pulled back their SOC 8 release. They retracted it. Okay. When they released it again the next day, the age minimums were gone. The guidelines had been erased. We're back to do whatever you want at whatever age. And they tried to get away with doing that with no comment. They didn't explain what happened. They didn't want to talk about it. All we know is that there were age minimums in there that would have made it so that you had to wait to at least a certain age, maybe 16 or something, before you started putting these kids under the knife, as opposed to the past where it'd be as young as anybody wanted. So it looked like there was going to be some semblance of safety. They took it away and they put back in, we'll do this surgery to kids as young as we want. And they didn't even bother to explain it to us. But we found out what happened. And you're going to love this. We found out what happened because there's a separate lawsuit that did discovery on the emails of some people that were involved in this. And it was just coincidental because the discovery that they did was not about this stuff. It was about something else going on. And because Dr. Rachel Levine, the transgender person in the Biden administration, you know the one, the Secretary of Health and Human Services or whatever, was a dude, now a lady, has kids and stuff like that. Just looks like a mess every time you see him, you know? Yeah. They're the person who called and got the age guidelines taken out. Yep. They called and they said, I saw you put in age guidelines. You don't want us to transition kids before they get to X age. We need you to take that out. And believe it or not, WPATH tried to push back a little bit. They said, well, hold up. We hired Johns Hopkins. We're trying to do some standards, like actually do medical decisions here. We did studies. We had this groupthink thing. And we made our decisions based on everybody's input and the scientific. Shut up. We just want you to pull that out. You just need to pull that out because it's not going to look good. And this is what Rachel Levine said. We have a fear that if you specify adolescent ages for surgeries, there'll be political backlash and then maybe legal restrictions. I'll repeat that. Biden administration, transgender adult Rachel Levine, who supposedly works on behalf of our health and human services in this country, interfered in the publishing of guidelines that would have prevented the transitioning of younger and younger kids. She told this medical organization to remove those guidelines so that surgeries would continue happening to young kids. Her reason for doing that was so that she could avoid political backlash. And she did this from her office in her official position. She didn't get fired. And if this isn't just the most naked, like, display of disgusting, self-serving, just political and just moral evil that I've ever seen, like, it is what you thought it was. Like, if you have that sense in your stomach when you look at Rachel Levine and just think, what the fuck are you doing? That it just happened. Just happened. Picked up the phone and said, fuck those kids. We'll put them to the knife at whatever age we want. And it's because I don't want to deal with backlash. And they made the change in the standards of care that govern the entire world of these surgeries because that person wanted that. That's out there. Everybody knows that. The documents are out there. You know, you don't see this in the media a lot, right? Because they tell you, oh, we just need to affirm the gender identity. Bullshit. The levels of evil in this are so bad that by the time everybody wakes up and sees the kids that have been, you know, put to the blade and the kids that have been forgotten or put through unimaginable loss or experiments that never should have happened, been betrayed, you know, been used as test dummies, been sexually abused by these people who none of them have good motives. So it's not surprising at all that a lot of them have proclivities for kids. Okay, at some point, people are going to stick their heads above the parapets and read all this or see it happen to somebody they know. And what I'm trying to do is get everybody read up on this stuff now so that you know before we have to find out the hard way, because we are this close to the hard way. The hard way is happening elsewhere. You know, people's kids are getting chewed up. But the fact that person still has a job, the disrespect that they have for me, you, our kids, our community, there's no word to describe it. And so I'm going to leave off right there for tonight. We got to return back to this one more time. We got to talk about WPATH a little bit more, because after that happened, a great investigative journalist named Michael Schellenberger, he got some whistleblowers inside WPATH to leak out a year's worth of conferences, documents, the decision-making processes, the standards they use for getting consent from kids and parents, the knowledge they have about outcomes or lack thereof, how aware they are of whether these things are cosmetic, tested at all. And it's shocking. It's even worse than you think. It's as bad as any of this, okay? And so when I get done telling you about that, you'll look around and you'll see a world where the origin of the transitioning of kids came from the worst nightmare story you've ever heard, where both patients died. The next best, like, standard of care for transitioning kids, the gender affirming Dutch way. Well, we found out that somebody died in the most awful way there too, out of just 20 kids that they tested it on. They covered up that death. They lied to us about puberty blockers. They're actually chemical castricants. Everything that this is built on is monsters, pedophiles, lies, deaths, maimings, removal of body parts on children. Okay? And so that's the origin story. And that from there, the organizations that are supposed to care about it, well, over in the UK, they got a good doctor to spend 4 years on it. She shut that shit down. She shut it down right away, ended it. And then she came over here and she toured over here. She's over here right now. She's taking meetings with politicians saying, what are you guys doing? Stop. Okay? The WPATH stuff just happened. The Rachel Levine thing just happened. The documents that prove that she was the one who undermined the standard of care just came out a couple weeks ago. And then the leak thing that's going to show all their internal stuff about butchering up kids, that came out this spring also. So that's brand new. But it shows there is no organization. There is no medical organization that's governing over any of this. All right. And so as we get to that point, you'll see there are no answers. All there is pain and horror and lies, which will bring us up to the local policy, to this North America-wide adoption of transgender transitioning of students that occurred in like 2020 pandemic time. Where did this come from? Why is it in every school? Why are they letting activist organizations write this stuff and put it down as if it's fact. 3/4 of it has already been disproven, like to everybody's satisfaction, but we're still going forward on it. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about examples of kids going to school and getting counseled by a counselor and what happens from it. And then I'm going to give you an exact example of somebody who tried to do good here in Washington State at a local gender clinic / hospital, where a kid who'd been identified as needing to transition was basically triaged out of public school and sent to a hospital to get screened to have radical, permanent, gender transition surgeries and stuff. Well, there was a newer doctor there on rotation who's kept up to date with the latest medicine and the latest news, probably because they care about kids. So they knew that, like, okay, they've actually had the long 4-year study over in the UK, and there's proof now this is all bad. They shut all that stuff down. Nobody's doing this stuff anymore. Our own national organization, it's in disarray. We see in there that there's nothing in there. There's nobody home there. So all the standards are gone. The evidence that we have is not good. There's no positive outcomes here. So, hey, why are you still trying to push this kid towards the knife? He says to, like, his supervisor. And assuming that they are of goodwill too, he starts explaining all the information and providing the studies and stuff. He's shut down. The woman gives him the "don't be a bigot," transphobe. She covers her ears and says, "This the science has already come in on all of this. The best standards have already been decided," which is just bullshit and just crazy too. If you're a doctor talking to somebody about whether or not you should maim a kid. Long story short, this person who tries to update their colleagues about the latest information that shows that, hey, we don't want to cut off the limbs of these kids, was met with pejoratives, the standard trans activist bullshit projection of "you're a bigot," and then that person was fired. Okay? That person was fired for trying to stand up for a kid with actual true information. Now, I think that particular kid was removed from the program, but that happened here in Washington State now. All right, so this isn't something going on elsewhere. It's going on in all the states that have adopted these policies, and school is starting in a couple weeks. And the district is brushing up policy on this right now. There is an appointed person at the school district who is their in-house expert on this. We're going to figure out who that is and talk to him. But in the meantime, we'll hit this one more time and we'll make sure you understand what the policy is telling these kids to do, what they base it on, and how all the links between that have been disproven, okay? From there, it'll be up to everybody, but, like, you'll get to where I'm at and you'll say there's no place for this in public school. There's no place for just putting in a policy that's basically a negative roll of the dice. It's like putting in a pit filled with vipers and chainsaws and just seeing if anybody falls in it, Just do that. Let's see. There's no good outcomes. It's super dangerous, right? It shouldn't be part of school. It's not. There's nobody at the school who is qualified to talk to your kid behind your back about their gender, okay? Even all this other shit aside. We don't need that. And the school might say, well, state law, blah, blah. Too bad, Too bad. You don't have to adopt anything that's illegal or that'll harm a kid. If you have to get your lawyers on it, get your lawyers on it. I don't think that the community is going to want this in there. Okay, so the school district, for once, has a ballot measure coming up. They need our votes and support on the bond. I've been on that committee 2 different times. Our moms run all those. We always pass those. We always should pass those. But you have a leverage point here. You have a leverage point to say, hey, we're going to back you and get you what you need, but you work for us. This isn't okay. And either remove this policy or we need to have a sit down and we're going to tell you that we don't want your people talking to our kids behind our backs. You're not going to keep secrets from us and you're not going to be doing this stuff that has been proven to, increase the odds of absolutely unlivable outcomes that will end up with Tucker Carlson at your door doing what he said in that YouTube video that I did at the beginning. Because I know a million red-blooded men around here who would feel the same way if you returned their son minus his penis with the girl's name and maybe trafficked 3 or 4 times. That's happening elsewhere. Okay. We got to make sure it doesn't happen here. We can't afford to have that happen to one kid. And we just got to like not watch another day cruise by and just assume that like the people who have a handle on the moral high ground are our betters, you know, like they know what's good for us. You might just need to be willing to get called a transphobe. You might just have to suck that one up. Okay. In reality, though, I think that probably this ship is sailing so quick that this is going to work itself out, but it won't if we sleep through it because kids are still getting experimented on right now. That said, I'll link my notes on this so you can grab any of these links that you want. Okay. Which includes the policy and, you know, everything that I mentioned in here. It's all fact. If you have questions, you can DM me, and I'll get back with this. I'm going to do one more so that you're all up to date on this going into the school year, and then going to transition into football, fall camp, and some positive stuff. This is just too important to let slide. You guys got to know about it because if you didn't, you'd be saying, well, why didn't anybody tell me about this? So I'm sorry to keep going to this well. I just really feel it's that important. I feel motivated I haven't been able to sleep when I read this stuff. And I read every one of the cases. I don't just read the one I read you about. I read every one that's available. So I'm really comfortable in saying like, this isn't a one-off, you know, this is some crazy shit that like future generations are going to say, what were you doing? Like we think about like when 30 years ago, they're still giving people lobotomies. What? You're helping their mental health by taking their brain out? Like, well, we thought, you know, that's what this is. So, all right. Y'all have a good one. We'll catch up with you later.